The hum of the ship was a constant, low note in Jin's bones. He stood in his small prep room, his hands smoothing down the front of his formal black suit. Felt strange against his skin. He was used to the softer, more practical fabrics of a science officer, not this stiff diplomatic uniform. He looked at himself in the reflective surface of the wall panel. Just Jin, a mid-level aide, a note-taker. His job today was to listen, to observe, and to not, under any circumstances, draw attention to himself outside his door. The sounds of the gathering galaxy grew louder. The Hall of Harmonic Convergence was the heart of the Celestial Arbiter, the flagship where today's treaty would be sealed. Humanity was joining the Galactic Concord. It was a big deal. Jin was a small part of it. He took a deep breath and left the room. The corridor opened up into the main hall, and Jin stopped for a moment, his scientist's mind capturing the details. The ceiling was not a ceiling at all, but a living tapestry of bioluminescent vines, pulsing with soft blues and greens. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet, like alien honey. Representatives from a dozen species moved in small groups, their forms a wild variety of shapes. There were the tall, willowy Thessalians with their gray skin, and the stout, mineral-covered Grozdans. But everyone was giving a wide space to the center of the room. That was where the Velterra would be. The insectoid species was a cornerstone of the Concord, and their ruler, Queen Mayong, was the guest of honor. Jin found his place at a small observation console along the wall, next to a few other human aides. His superior, Hannah, was already in the thick of things, talking smoothly with a Thessalian envoy. Hannah was all sharp smiles and perfect posture. Jin gave her a small nod, which she did not see, and activated his datapad. His official task was to log the event's proceedings. Who spoke, what ceremonial gifts were exchanged, any notable reactions. It was boring, vital work. It was also a perfect cover for what Jin really did, which was watch. He had been an exobiologist before being assigned to the diplomatic corps for his keen observational skills. They meant he was quiet and noticed things others missed. A sudden, harmonic chime filled the hall. All conversation stopped. A doorway on the far side, woven from living wood, irised open. The Velterra entered. There were 6 of them, moving with a silent, coordinated grace that spoke of a deep hive connection. Their bodies were elegant, with polished carapaces the color of deep amber and jade. But it was the one in the center who commanded all eyes, Queen Mayong. Her title among her people was the Resonant Queen. Her carapace was etched with fine silver lines that caught the light, and a delicate, semi-transparent mantle flowed from her shoulders like a cape. She did not walk so much as glide, her every movement producing a soft, almost musical sound. The hall bowed, a wave of different gestures. Humans dipped their heads. Jin watched, fascinated. Her multifaceted eyes took in the room, giving nothing away. The ceremony began. Speeches were made. Promises of peace and trade were spoken. Jin logged it all, his fingers flying over the pad. He noted how the other species kept a respectful distance from the queen, not just out of protocol but something else. Caution. The Velterra were powerful, but their biology was known to be sensitive. It was a piece of information filed away in the back of his mind. Then came the gift-giving. Ambassador Kriek of the Zilnaar stepped forward. The Zilnars were arachnid-like, with many careful limbs and a reputation for being cunning traders. They were also historic rivals of the Velterra. Kriek's carapace was a polished black. He moved with a precise, clicking sound. Resonant Queen. Kriek's voice was translated by the small device on his thorax, smooth and diplomatic. To mark this new era, where old rivalries are set aside, the Zilnaar offer a gift of true sincerity. One of his attendants brought forward a case. It opened, and inside, on a bed of glowing moss, was a fruit. It was the size of a melon, with a swirling, opalescent shell that seemed to hold its own light. A Kaivala melon, Kriek announced, from the sacred southern ridges of our homeworld. It represents the purity of a new beginning. A soft murmur went through the crowd. This was a significant gesture. The fruit was famously rare and difficult to grow. Offering it was a powerful symbol. Jean watched Queen Mayong. She inclined her head gracefully. The gift is seen and appreciated, Ambassador. Its beauty is noted. Her voice was like wind chimes, translated but still melodic. Her attendants accepted the case. The ritual demanded she would taste it later, during the banquet, as a public sign of accepting the new piece. Jean made a note. Zillinaar gift, Kavala melon. Symbolic. Accepted. He looked at the fruit, his scientist's mind ticking over. He had read about it. It was a delicacy. He also remembered, from his old studies, a brief article on Zillinaar horticulture. Something about microclimates and symbiotic relationships. The thought was vague, unformed. He pushed it aside. His job was to record, not to speculate. The ceremony moved on. Jean continued his work, a silent man in a suit, watching a galaxy of wonders, unaware that the vague, unformed thought was a seed. And seeds, given the right conditions, have a way of growing into something that changes everything. The Hall of Harmonic Convergence was a living jewel box. The air shimmered with gentle scents, sharp ozone, sweet nectar, the clean smell of polished stone. Jean stood by his assigned console, a small shelf of dark wood. It was at the edge of the great room. From here, he could see everything and be seen by almost no one. It was where he belonged. His fingers moved across the datapad, making notes. His job was simple. Record the flow of the event. Who spoke? What gifts were given? How the different species interacted. It was a job that required a quiet mind and sharp eyes. Jean had both. He watched as the rulers and ambassadors mingled. He saw his superior, Hannah, moving through the crowd with a fixed, pleasant smile. She was talking with a being made of shifting light. Jean noted it down. Hannah in conversation with Luminarian envoy. Topics: cultural exchange. His eyes kept drifting back to the center. Queen Mayong sat on a seat that was more like a piece of living crystal. It grew from the floor itself. Her Velterra attendants stood in a perfect circle around her, still as statues. Other species approached her, bowed, exchanged a few words, and then moved away. There was always a space around her. It was a bubble of respect or maybe caution. Jean knew why. He had studied it. The Velterra were a hive mind species. Their thoughts were connected in a way humans could barely understand. This made them incredibly unified and intelligent. But their biology, which allowed this connection, was delicate. Their nervous systems were fine-tuned, sensitive to specific chemicals. Things that other species ate or drank without thought could be like poison to them. A simple spice, a common pollen, could disrupt the hive connections, could cause pain, confusion, even death. This was not a secret. It was just a fact, like some humans were allergic to nuts. Because of this, the queen's food was handled only by her own trusted attendants. They would check everything. Jean saw them now. 2 attendants were at a side table, using small scanners on the plates of food offered by the hosts. They were looking for threats everyone knew about. Jin's mind, trained for science, enjoyed this puzzle. He liked understanding how things worked, how life on one world was different from life on another. He noted the careful dance of security around the queen. It was all about known dangers. Then his gaze moved to the Zillinaar gift. The Kaivala melon sat on its own stand now, glowing with that soft, inner light. It was a beautiful thing, a symbol of peace from an old rival. Jean thought it was a smart move by Ambassador Creek. It made the Zillinaar look generous. He tapped his datapad, pulling up the public file on the melon. He read the basics again. Origin: southern fog ridges of Zillinaar Prime. Symbol of purity and new beginnings. Rare. His mind, always curious, wanted to know more. What kind of soil did it grow in? What pollinated it? The official file didn't say. A memory tickled at the back of his thoughts. It was from years ago, back when he spent all his time in labs and libraries. He had been reading about planetary safety, about how life from one planet could accidentally cause harm on another. It was a dry subject. One case study was about a flowering vine on some colony world. A fungus that lived on the vine was harmless to the local animals. But when the vine was exported to another world, the fungus produced a different chemical in the new climate. That chemical made a different species of animal very sick. It was an accident. No one meant any harm. The fungus was just being a fungus. It was a lesson in unexpected consequences. Jean looked from the melon to the queen, the southern fog ridges, a humid, wet place. Fungi loved places like that. What if? He shook his head slightly, pushing the thought away. It was a wild guess. The melon was a gift from a high ambassador. It would have been checked 100 times. They would have looked for known toxins, for contaminants. They would have been especially careful with a gift for the Velterra queen. His job was to record facts, not to imagine disasters. He looked down at his datapad and continued his notes. Ambassador Creek observed conversing with Grosden mineral shaper. Peers relaxed. Gift melon remains focal point of decor. The banquet was moving to the next stage. Servers began to bring out the main courses. Trays floated through the air, guided by gentle lights. There was laughter, the soft chime of glass, the murmur of many voices. It was a picture of galactic unity. Jean did his job. He was a shadow, a recorder. But the unformed thought, the connection between a forgotten case study and a glowing fruit, did not go away. It settled in a corner of his mind like a seed buried in dark soil. It was quiet. It was still. But it was there. And seeds, once planted, have a way of growing whether you want them to or not. He watched the peaceful, smiling crowd, and for the first time that evening, he felt a cold, thin thread of worry. The banquet was a slow, beautiful dance of light and sound. Jean sat at his small console, his fingers moving over the datapad. He logged each course as it was presented. He noted the reactions. He was a ghost in the machine of diplomacy, silent and efficient in front of him. The great table curved in a half-moon. Queen Mayong sat at the center, a quiet point of calm. The strange, wonderful foods of a dozen worlds were brought out. Jean described them. The glowing broth of the Thessalians, the crystallized fungi of the Grosdens. He noted that the queen tasted only a tiny amount from a few select plates, those pre-screened by her own staff. Her biology was delicate. It was a well-known fact, a footnote in every briefing. But seeing it in practice was different. It was not just preference. It was a necessity for survival. His mind, trained for years in exobiology, began to work without him telling it to. It was like a puzzle. The pieces were all from different boxes, scattered across his memory. Piece 1. Velterra Neural Physiology. He remembered a dry academic paper. The Velterra hive mind operated on a specific neurochemical spectrum. They were incredibly efficient but also incredibly vulnerable. Certain compounds, harmless to most species, could act like a scrambling device on their minds. It could cause madness, a breaking of the hive connections, or death. The paper had listed examples. One category was neuromimetic agents, substances that tricked the nervous system. Piece 2, the gift. His eyes drifted to the Kaivala melon. It sat now on a raised platter near the queen's place, glowing softly. A symbol, a new beginning. He pulled up the basic public file on it. Native to the southern ridges of the Zillanaar homeworld. A humid, fogdrenset climate. It grew in symbiosis with the native pollinators and... His fingers paused. The file was superficial. It mentioned nothing about threats. It was a diplomatic file, not a scientific one. Piece 3. An old memory. This was the fuzzy one. It was from his early days as a student. He had been researching cross-planetary contaminations. He'd read a case study, a small one. It was about a fungus, a Zillanaar fungus with a long, complicated name. It had a symbiotic relationship with a certain type of fruit vine in very specific high-altitude fog zones. The fungus helped the fruit absorb nutrients. But under certain stress conditions, the fungus produced a compound as a defense mechanism. The paper had a technical name for it. Jin's breath caught slightly. He couldn't remember the name, but he remembered the tagline in the summary: a compound categorized as a Class II neural dissonance agent in species with aminopterin-based synaptic structures. Aminopterin-based synaptic structures, like the Velterra. The pieces hovered in his mind. They did not click together. Not yet. It was a shadow of a possibility, a ghost of a threat. He looked at the melon. It looked perfect. He looked at Ambassador Creek. The Zillionaire ambassador was eating, conversing politely with a Grosden. He showed no sign of tension. Was it a plot? Or was it a terrible accident? The fungus might not even be present. The melon for the queen would be from the most controlled, perfect orchard. It was a symbol. They would have checked it. Would they have checked for a fungus that was harmless to Zillionaire? A fungus that might not even be a known contaminant because its danger was to a species with a completely different biology. A chill started in Jin's stomach, cold and slow. He was not sure. He was maybe 1% sure. To speak without proof was not just career suicide. It was a diplomatic bomb. It would accuse a founding Concord species of attempted assassination at the very moment of alliance. It could shatter the peace before it began. Hannah's words from earlier echoed in his head. Do nothing to disrupt the proceedings, Jean. Observe only. His mouth felt dry. He took a sip of water. The ceremonial servers, a mix of Concord species, began a new procession. They were moving toward the Kaivala melon. The time for the ritual tasting was coming. He saw Queen Myong's attendants shift, preparing. The queen herself turned her head gracefully to watch the approach. Jin's eyes flicked to Hannah. She was locked in a quiet, intense conversation with a Thessalian, a tight smile on her face. She was playing the long game, building connections. She saw the big picture. Jean saw a single, specific, terrifying biological possibility. He looked to Chul, the head of security. Chul was scanning the room, his eyes moving over faces, hands, potential weapons. He was looking for a gun, a blade, a sudden aggressive movement. He was not looking at a piece of fruit. How could he? It was a gift already accepted, sitting in plain sight. Jean was trapped. His knowledge was a cage. If he was wrong, he would be the human who insulted the Zillionaire and embarrassed the queen, destroying his life and harming humanity's new place in the galaxy. If he was right and he said nothing, a queen would die, the hive mind could fall into chaos, and a war would start anyway. The weight pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He was just a man at a desk. The dance of light and sound continued around him, beautiful and slow, moving like a river toward a waterfall he alone seemed to see. The dance of the servers was precise. They moved as one unit, a blend of different species operating under strict ceremonial rules. Their focus was the Kaivala melon on its glowing platter. The hall's soft lights seemed to gather around the fruit, making it the center of the universe. A Zillionaire server, with careful, delicate limbs, lifted a crystal knife. The blade caught the light. With a smooth motion, it pierced the opalescent rind. A collective, almost inaudible sigh went through the watching crowd. The inside of the melon was a surprise. It was not the expected wet flesh, but a dense, crystalline structure that glittered with 1,000 tiny points of light, like a galaxy trapped within. It was breathtaking. The server began to cut a small, perfect slice. Queen Myong watched, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the shimmer from the fruit. Her posture was one of serene acceptance. To refuse now would be a galactic insult. To eat it was the final seal on the treaty. It was a moment frozen in time. Heavy with meaning, Jin's heart was a drum in his ears. The sound of the party faded into a muffled roar. He saw the slice, gleaming on a small platinum plate. He saw the server, a Velterra attendant, step forward to receive it. The attendant would carry it the final few steps to the queen. It was a journey of maybe 10 seconds. The pieces in Jin's mind were no longer separate. They crashed together with the force of a starship collision. The humid ridges, the symbiotic fungus, the neural dissonance agent, the Velterra's unique vulnerability. It wasn't a 1% chance. It was a near certainty. The melon was beautiful, a symbol of peace, and it was almost definitely a carrier of death for the being about to consume it. He saw Hannah from the corner of his eye. She had finally noticed the ceremony reaching its peak. She was watching with a diplomat's pleased expression, a slight nod of her head. She saw a political success. He saw Chul. His hand was resting near his communication device, his eyes scanning the faces in the crowd. He saw no threat. Jean was the only one who saw the threat. The knowledge was a physical weight, a stone in his throat. His career flashed before his eyes. The quiet labs, the assignment here, his parents' pride. It would all be gone. He would be the fool, the troublemaker, the one who broke the alliance on its first day. But then he saw the queen. Not as a political figure, but as a living being. A ruler of her people. A creature of elegant, fragile biology. She was about to put poison in her mouth, and everyone was smiling. A memory, sudden and sharp, hit him. It was not from his training. It was from childhood. He saw his younger self, silent and watching on a school playground as a larger child tried to force another to eat a piece of mud. He had said nothing then. He had just watched, feeling sick. The shame of that moment, small and human, flooded him. His body moved before his mind could finish the argument. It was not a calculated decision. It was a reflex, a human reflex. He pushed his chair back. The sound was harsh in the quiet hall. He stepped away from the safety of his console, away from the wall. He broke the line of aids. His formal shoes clicked on the polished floor, each step echoing like a gunshot in the profound silence that had suddenly fallen. Every eye, from every species, turned to him. The Velterra attendant froze, the platinum plate in hand. Halfway to the queen. Jin's mouth was dry. His voice, when it came out, was not loud. It was clear. It cut through the silence like the crystal knife had cut the melon. "Your resonance," he said, the title feeling strange on his tongue. He bowed his head, a quick human gesture of respect, but his eyes remained up, locked on the queen. "Please, do not consume that food." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a living thing, thick and heavy. It was the silence of a breath held by 1,000 beings. The bioluminescent vines on the ceiling seemed to pulse slower, as if even the ship was waiting. Queen Myong's head tilted, a fraction of an inch, her glittering eyes fixed on him. The plate in her attendant's hand trembled slightly. Ambassador Creek was the first to break the silence. A sharp, angry click came from his thorax before his translator activated. "What is this?" His translated voice hissed, smoothness gone, replaced by cold fury. A human insult? An accusation in the middle of peace. He rose, his multiple limbs stiff. Hannah was staring at Jean, her face pale, her professional mask shattered into pure shock and horror. Chol's hand was now fully on his device, his body tense, confused, looking from Jean to the ambassador, trying to find the physical threat. Jean stood alone in the open space, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. The first step was taken. There was no going back. All he had now were the words, and he had to make them count. The silence stretched. It was so deep Jean could hear the faint, nervous click of a Zillinar limb. He felt the heat of every stare. Hannah's look was a blade. Ambassador Creek's was a storm, but he kept his eyes on Queen Myong. She was the only one who mattered now. The queen slowly raised one delicate hand. It was a command for stillness. The angry hiss from Creek stopped. She placed the hand back on the table, her fingers making a soft chime against the crystal surface. Her multifaceted eyes did not blink. They studied Jean, weighing him. "The human aid," she said, her wind chime voice calm. "You speak from your place of observation. Explain this warning." Her tone was not angry. It was curious. It was a thread of hope. Jean clung to it. He bowed again, lower this time, buying a second to order his thoughts. "Your resonance," he began, his voice stronger now. He had to be clear. He had to be technical. He could not sound like he was making a wild guess. "I offer no insult. I serve as an observer and my original training is in exobiology. I study the life of different worlds." He paused, seeing she was listening. "I have studied the great harmony of the Velterra people. Your biology is a marvel. It is also uniquely sensitive. Your neural connections work on a spectrum that is rare in the galaxy. Certain compounds, harmless to others, can act as powerful disruptors to your kind." A soft murmur went through some of the scientific aides in the crowd. They knew this was true. It was not a secret. Jean pressed on. He gestured with an open hand toward the gleaming slice of melon. "The gift is beautiful. It is a symbol of peace. I believe the offer is sincere." He glanced at Creek, trying to soften the blow. But gifts from one world to another carry more than intention. They carry biology. Now he turned his body slightly to address the whole hall, but his words were still for the queen. "The Kaivala melon grows in a very specific place. The southern fog ridges of the Zillinar homeworld. In that climate, it often exists in symbiosis with a native fungus. This fungus is benign to zilNAR biology. It is part of the fruit's environment. No one would check for it because for the zilNAR it is not a contaminant. He took a step closer, his focus returning to the queen. But under certain conditions, this fungus produces a compound. In our records, it is called a neural dissonance agent. For a species with aminopterin-based synapses, for the Velterra, your resonance, this compound does not pass harmlessly. It mimics a destructive signal. It could scramble the hive connections. It could cause. He did not say death or madness. He did not need to. It could cause profound harm. He finished, his words hanging in the air. I believe the danger is not from the hand that gave the gift, but from the unseen life that traveled with it. The climate of your hive world is different. What is a symbol to one may carry an unseen, lethal passenger. For a long moment no one spoke. The theory was out there. It was specific. It was scientific. It was not a shout of poison, but a quiet warning of possible accident. Ambassador Creek broke the silence. Ridiculous, he spat. This is fantasy. An excuse for a human to create drama. The melons are screened. They are perfect. Queen Mayong looked from Jin's earnest face to the furious ambassador. Then she looked down at the glittering slice on the plate. Her calm was unshakable. Ambassador, she chimed softly, the human's words are not an accusation of your intent. They are a hypothesis of biology. My life and the stability of my hive are matters of fact, not politics. She lifted her gaze to her own science attendants, who stood rigid nearby. Scan the fruit. Use the full spectrum. Look for organic signatures that are not part of the primary plant matrix. Then she did something remarkable. She looked at the mammalian botanist from the neutral Crescent species. Esteemed Crescent, would you lend your instruments and your impartial eye to this examination? Let truth be found in shared light. The Crescent, a furry being with large, calm eyes, bowed. Of course, resonant queen. The hall remained in tense silence as the equipment was brought forward. Jean stood unmoving in the space he had claimed. Hannah was staring at the table, her face a mask of dread. Chul watched the zilNAR, his body ready. Creek was a statue of offended pride. The Velterra attendant placed the whole, uncut melon and the single slice under the scanner. A three-dimensional image, visible to all, glowed in the air above the table. The dense, crystalline structure of the fruit was beautiful. The scanners probed deeper, looking for chemical and biological fingerprints. Then, the Crescent operator zoomed in on a section of the rind, near where the knife had cut. Pattern emerged. It was faint, a ghostly, web-like lattice growing just beneath the opalescent skin. It was not part of the melon. The chemical signature flashed on the screen. It matched the profile of the symbiotic fungus. A soft, collective gasp moved through the hall like a wave. The Crescent spoke, its voice gentle but final. The analysis confirms an organic contaminant. Its structure is consistent with the Kaivala ridge fungus. The compound it produces is present in trace amounts on the rind and would have infused the edible material. The truth was now a thing in the room, solid and quiet. It was not a weapon sent by an enemy. It was an accident waiting to happen. A tragedy delivered with a smile. All eyes turned from the glowing screen to the lone human who had seen it coming. The evidence hung in the air, glowing with cold, hard light. The ghostly web of the fungus on the screen was more powerful than any shout. The silence that followed was different now. The tension of accusation was gone, replaced by the heavy, sober weight of a disaster narrowly avoided. Ambassador Creek stared at the spectral image. His proud, stiff posture seemed to shrink. The anger drained from him, leaving behind something worse. A deep, public horror. He was not a villain. He was a diplomat who had almost delivered death by mistake. He turned his head, not to the Queen first, but to his own aides. Their quiet, rapid clicks were full of panic. They had screened for known toxins, for weapons. They had not screened for a harmless native fungus. It was a terrible, simple error. He finally looked at Queen Mayong. He bowed his head, a profound gesture for his species. Resonant Queen. His translated voice was stripped of all its smoothness, now rough with shame. This is a failure of care. The gift was given with a true heart for peace. But our procedures, our knowledge were incomplete. The blame is ours. The shame is ours. He did not make excuses. The evidence was beyond argument. Queen Mayong observed him for a long moment. The hall waited on her judgment. This was the moment the new alliance could still crack. Not with a bang, but with a slow, cold fracture of trust, she chimed softly. Ambassador Creek, I see the truth on the screen, and I see the truth in your words. You offered a symbol from your world with an open hand. The hidden danger was not in your intent, but in the gaps between our understandings of the galaxy. She paused, letting her words settle. An enemy sends poison knowing it is poison. A friend may accidentally send it not knowing. The response to an enemy is war. The response to a friend's error is better knowledge. Let this be the first lesson of our new alliance. We must look deeper, together. It was forgiveness, but it was also a command. The crisis was being turned into a foundation. A murmur of relief, mixed with deep respect, rustled through the crowd. Then, Queen Mayong turned her gaze. She looked past the stunned diplomats, past her own attendants, past the glowing screen. Her multifaceted eyes found Jean. He was still standing in the same spot, alone in the open space. He felt suddenly very exposed, like a specimen under a lens. The human aid, she said. Jean. He straightened, his heart pounding again, but for a new reason. Your resonance. Step forward. He did, walking the final few steps to stand before the high table. He kept his eyes lowered respectfully. Look at me, she chimed. Not unkindly that he raised his head. Her face was impossible to read in a human way, but the tilt of her head was one of pure, focused curiosity. You were placed here to watch, she said. You saw more than was asked. You connected knowledge from stars that do not touch. Your own voice was small in this hall, and the cost of using it was great for you. Why did you speak? Jin's mind went blank for a second. He could give a diplomatic answer. He could say duty or for the alliance. But the Queen's question demanded the truth. He thought of the cold fear in his stomach, the image of her consuming the glittering slice. Because it was the right thing to do, he said, the words simple and plain. To see a danger, to have the knowledge that might prevent harm, and to choose silence? That is not protection. That is betrayal. I could not just watch. Queen Mayong was silent. She seemed to be considering his words, weighing the human concept of the right thing against the collective will of a hive mind. My people feel a pull from the whole, she said finally. We act when the chorus of the hive guides us. You acted because of a voice inside one single mind, a conscience. She said the word as if it were a rare and fascinating artifact. This is a strength we did not fully appreciate. Today, the chorus of my people did not sense this threat. It was the quiet conscience of one that saved the many. She looked to Hannah, who had approached slowly, her face still pale but now thoughtful. Your aide, Diplomat Hannah, has a valuable tool. Not just a recorder of events, but a true observer. Hannah bowed. He has shown us all a new definition of duty, your resonance. Queen Mayong gave a final, graceful nod to Jean. You have the thanks of the hive, and you have my personal thanks. The galaxy is vast and filled with hidden threats. It seems we need not just great armies and wise treaties, but also those who watch and who care enough to speak from the silence. With that, the moment was over. The Queen gestured, and the contaminated melon was quietly taken away. The banquet, though changed forever, would continue. But as Jean turned to go back to his place, he felt the stares again. They were no longer of shock or anger. They were looks of curiosity, of recalculated respect. He was not just Jean the aide anymore. He was the man who had stepped forward. The banquet did not resume its earlier rhythm. The music and conversation started again, but the tone was quieter, more thoughtful. The incident was the only thing anyone could think about. Jean returned to his console, but he knew his work of silent observation was over for the night. Every few minutes, a diplomat from a smaller species would catch his eye and give a small, respectful nod. He tried to focus on his datapad, but the words blurred together. After a short while, Hannah appeared at his side. She did not speak at first. She just stood next to him, watching the room. Finally, she said, "Walk with me." He followed her out of the main hall into a quieter adjoining corridor lined with viewports that showed the slow drift of stars. She stopped and turned to him. Her professional mask was back, but it was softer now, with cracks of genuine feeling showing through. "Jean," she began. "My first reaction was anger, pure professional terror. I thought you had thrown away years of work in 10 seconds. She sighed, looking out at the stars. "I was wrong. You saw what none of us could see. Not security, not the other scientists, not me. I was looking at politics. You were looking at her. At the danger to her, personally." Jean didn't know what to say. I had a bad feeling. And then I remembered the data." "That's the point," Hannah said, turning back to him. "You remembered. You connected distant facts. That's more valuable than just following a protocol." The Queen was right. We have been talking about humanity's strength as our diversity, our adaptability. But tonight it was something simpler. It was individual conscience. It was courage. She gave him a real, if tired, smile. "You've probably also gotten us the most sincere trade deal on biological safety protocols in galactic history. Ambassador Kriek is falling over himself to propose it." Before Jean could respond, Chul approached. The security chief's face was serious as always, but he stopped in front of Jean and gave a firm, single nod. It was a soldier's compliment. "I was looking for a shooter, a blade, a bomb," Chul said, his voice low. "I will need to learn to look for other things. Thank you for seeing what I did not." He moved on, resuming his patrol. Jean felt a warmth that wasn't from the ship's climate control. Later, as the event was winding down, a Velterra attendant approached Jean. The attendant chimed softly. "The resonant queen requests a final word before her departure. In private." Hannah, standing nearby, just nodded to Jean. He followed the attendant to a small, serene antechamber. Queen Mayong was there, without her surrounding court. She seemed smaller away from the crowd, but her presence was just as powerful. "Jean," she chimed, "your resonance. Your actions tonight will be recorded in the history of my hive," she said plainly. "A story of a danger unseen, and a voice from an unexpected quarter that gave warning. It is a good story. It teaches vigilance and the value of a different perspective." She took a step closer. "You asked for no reward. You acted from a place of the right thing. This is a concept my people are now discussing with great interest. The hive moves as one. But sometimes it seems the one must act to save the whole. It is a curious and powerful idea." Jean swallowed. "I only did what anyone would have done." "That is where you are wrong," she replied, a gentle chime in her voice. "Almost everyone else did not. You did. That is what makes it significant. Remember this. Your strength is not in being like us, but in being what you are. A human with a mind that seeks connections and a conscience that demands action. Guard that." She inclined her head in a final, profound gesture of respect. The audience was over. The halls of the Celestial Arbiter were quiet as Jean finally made his way back toward his quarters. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a deep, humming exhaustion. He passed a large viewport and stopped, looking out at the infinite blackness dotted with stars. He thought about the playground from his childhood, the shame of his silence. He had carried that small failure for years without even knowing it. Tonight, he had not stayed silent. The cost had been fear, the risk of ruin. The result was a queen alive, a war averted, and an alliance made stronger, not by a grand speech, but by a quiet warning. He was not a hero from the stories. He was just Jean, a man who knew about fungi and neural chemistry. A man who, for one critical moment, could not bear to just watch, that he placed his hand against the cool transparency of the viewport. Out there were a million worlds, a billion hidden dangers, and countless wonders. Humanity was a small part of it now. Their place, he realized, would not be won just by ships or treaties. It would be earned by moments like this, by the quiet people paying attention, by the individuals who, when it mattered most, found the courage to step forward and speak a simple, terrifying truth. That he took a deep breath. The stars looked no different than they had that morning, but he felt different. He turned from the view and walked down the corridor, the sound of his footsteps alone in the quiet hall, a small but steady sound in the vastness of space.